I'm doing everything right. So why is it still failing? Jack Miller muttered under his breath as he surveyed the endless rows of brown, cracked soil stretching across his farm, the sun beating down relentlessly, sweat sliding off his forehead into his dirt-streaked shirt, and the weight of mounting bills pressing on his mind heavier than any plow. Every day he woke before dawn, checked every fence, every crop, every irrigation line, pushing the limits of exhaustion, yet every evening ended the same, with wilted plants and a pit in his stomach that refused to ease, neighbors stopping by with sympathetic nods that somehow made him feel smaller, whispers of, maybe it's just a bad year, ringing hollow in his ears while he measured out feed for the cows, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor, every move precise, yet somehow insufficient, each failure echoing louder than the day before, and yet there was a spark he couldn't extinguish, a stubborn part of him that refused to walk away from the land his father had nurtured and his grandfather before him. The smell of fresh-cut hay mingling with the dust of the fields as he paused for a moment, chest rising and falling rapidly, heart pounding with the kind of anxiety only someone who has invested everything into a dream can feel. He thought about the neighbor who once casually mentioned, "It's not about how hard you work, it's about what you focus on." And for a split second that idea lodged in his mind, odd and almost laughable, yet somehow it grew into a seed of possibility, causing him to squint against the glare of the morning sun and take a deep breath, surveying his farm with a slightly different eye, noticing which crops were actually thriving, which sections of soil drained well, which irrigation lines needed fixing before planting the next row. And even as he moved to adjust the old tractor, he felt a shift inside him, a tiny tug of curiosity, of determination, of a sense that maybe there was a smarter path hidden beneath all the repetitive toil, that perhaps the long hours and endless sweat could finally meet results if applied differently. And so he started jotting down notes in a worn notebook, marking patterns, planning timing, testing small changes day by day, the anticipation building with each small adjustment, a silent thrill beneath the fatigue, a feeling that he was finally, maybe for the first time, approaching his work with eyes open, seeing not just the labor but the strategy. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the fields, Jack allowed himself a faint smile, the kind that held the weight of hope mixed with doubt, a tiny ember of promise that something bigger was waiting just beyond the horizon, yet still untold. Jack Miller grew up in a small town in the Midwest where mornings were painted in shades of gold, and the air carried the scent of fresh hay and earth, a world where every neighbor knew each other by name, and every farm had a story behind it, his family having tilled the same soil for 3 generations. Jack was not extraordinary in appearance, his medium-toned skin tanned from years under the sun, hands toughened by plowing and planting. But there was a quiet determination in his green eyes that belied the exhaustion on his face, the kind of determination that only someone who has inherited a dream and feels its weight would carry. And every morning he rose before sunrise, breakfast barely eaten, boots on and gloves ready, heading into the fields where rows of crops awaited his attention, each plant a fragile hope tethered to his labor. He meticulously checked irrigation lines, ensured fences were secure, and measured soil moisture, noting small changes, patterns that might hint at improvement, yet still feeling the constant sting of underachievement. Neighbors passed by in trucks, waving with a casual smile, offering advice or small gifts from their gardens, Jack nodding politely, appreciating the gestures but inwardly consumed by questions about his failures. Why, despite his efforts, the crops did not flourish as he imagined, the barn filled with equipment humming quietly, tractors and plows resting from a night of use. And he often found himself walking through the empty rows at dawn, hands brushing against stalks, feeling the rough texture beneath his fingers, reflecting on every choice made, every seed sown, realizing that his knowledge of the land was deep, but perhaps misaligned with the changing seasons or the timing of each irrigation. He kept a journal, small handwritten notes about rainfall, sun hours, and soil condition, trying to map a method to the madness, seeking patterns that might unlock success, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant livestock and the occasional bird call, moments that reminded him why he loved this life even in struggle. And at night, under dim lantern light in his farmhouse kitchen, Jack pored over his notes, highlighting mistakes, dreaming of what might work, imagining small victories that would bring the farm back to life. And in those quiet hours, the farmer's resilience grew, a determination not just to work harder, but to understand smarter, to see beyond the toil and recognize the small shifts that could make a monumental difference. And even as doubts lingered and failures continued to test his spirit, Jack Miller's presence in the fields carried a quiet hope, the kind that whispers of potential change, a sense that if he could just align effort with insight, the land would respond, and his family legacy would not only endure but thrive. Jack Miller had already spent countless sunrises in the fields, each day a repetition of the last, planting, watering, checking the soil, repairing fences, feeding livestock, and still feeling as though he was running in place, the crops not responding as he had hoped. His journal filled with notes and observations, each entry a testament to effort without reward, and yet he refused to quit. Compelled by a sense of duty to his family and the legacy of the land, he experimented with different techniques, adjusting the timing of irrigation, rotating crops, and testing soil amendments. Each small change met with mixed results, sometimes promising, other times discouraging, and every evening he reviewed the day, pondering why some sections flourished while others faltered, trying to find the thread that would connect hard work to success, the weight of repeated failure pressing on his shoulders, yet also sharpening his mind, forcing him to consider strategy over sheer effort, to question assumptions he had carried for years. And in those moments he discovered patterns he had overlooked, noticing that certain crops thrived only under precise sunlight exposure, certain rows needed specific spacing, certain weeds needed immediate removal, and though he still faced setbacks, these realizations gave him a glimmer of control, a sense that mastery was possible if he paid attention to the right details. And so he pressed on, each day a blend of trial and observation, hope and doubt, careful to note what worked and what did not, learning to listen to the land, to read its subtle cues, the changing color of leaves, the texture of soil, the position of shadows, understanding that success would not come from sheer hours alone but from the intelligence applied to every action. And as the weeks passed, Jack felt a transformation in how he approached the work, less frantic, more deliberate, each decision informed by observation and reflection, and though the farm was still not thriving completely, he sensed that the trajectory was shifting, a feeling that perseverance combined with careful analysis was leading him towards something greater, a quiet excitement that each small victory was building toward a larger outcome, teaching him patience, resilience, and the importance of thoughtful action, shaping Jack not just as a laborer of the land, but as someone beginning to understand the subtle art of farming beyond mere effort. The day came when Jack Miller felt the crushing weight of despair more intensely than ever before, as he walked through the rows of crops that had yet again failed to meet expectations. The leaves wilted despite all his careful adjustments, the soil uneven despite hours of toil, and the long shadows of the setting sun stretching across the field seemed to echo the doubts in his mind, each step heavier than the last, a silent reminder that effort alone could not undo months of misfortune. He paused at the edge of the cornfield, hands on his hips, staring at the horizon as the wind carried the faint scent of hay and the distant hum of farm machinery, and he felt a momentary urge to walk away, to abandon the land that had been his family's legacy for generations. Yet within that fleeting surrender, a quiet voice in his head reminded him of the small successes he had seen in other sections of the farm, areas where his careful observations and small adjustments had begun to show promise, and he clung to that fragment of hope as he retraced his steps, making notes in his journal of the patterns he had discovered, the nuances of sunlight, soil moisture, and irrigation timing, each failure now offering a clue rather than just disappointment. He spent that night on the farmhouse porch, the cool breeze against his face a contrast to the heat of his frustration, thinking about the countless hours he had invested, realizing that his desperation was not a sign of weakness but a signal that change was necessary. And as he reflected, he recognized that understanding the land required patience and insight beyond the brute force of labor, and that in order to succeed, he would need to embrace experimentation, risk small failures, and refine his approach with precision. the moon casting silver light across the fields as he imagined the possibilities of transformation. And though the thought of losing everything still haunted him, Jack felt a subtle shift within, a readiness to confront the challenges ahead with renewed focus, a determination to turn the lessons of repeated setbacks into a strategy that could finally yield results. And in that moment, standing amidst the silent fields, he sensed that the journey of struggle was reaching a pivotal point, that the culmination of effort and learning was about to converge, and even as the doubts lingered, there was an ember of resolve glowing quietly, promising that the next steps he took could change the story of his farm entirely. Late one afternoon, as Jack Miller leaned against the fence, he finally understood something that had been eluding him for years. Working harder than everyone else did not guarantee success. The revelation hitting him with the clarity of a crisp autumn morning, and he realized that he had been pouring every ounce of his strength into the wrong things, tending to tasks that felt urgent but did not truly move the needle for his farm. And in that moment, the simplicity of a single rule emerged, with undeniable force in his mind, a principle so straightforward yet so transformative that it reshaped his entire approach. Focus on what matters most, and let go of everything else. He reflected on the days spent repairing equipment that did not need fixing, hours spent on irrigation lines that were already functioning, moments spent worrying about minor imperfections that could not impact the overall harvest. And he recognized that these efforts had diluted his energy, preventing him from prioritizing the few actions that could genuinely produce results. As the sun dipped lower behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in orange and pink, Jack opened his notebook and wrote down the insight in large, deliberate letters, the words feeling heavier and more significant than any previous note he had ever made. He understood that by concentrating on the core tasks that truly influenced crop yield, timing, soil health, and plant care, he could create an exponential effect that no amount of scattered effort could achieve. And as he reviewed his journal, he began to see the pattern in all his small successes. The areas of the farm that had flourished despite challenges were always the ones where he had applied focused, intentional action rather than just sheer labor, and the clarity of this principle gave him a calm confidence, a sense that although the road ahead was still uncertain, he now possessed a guiding light, a simple rule that could transform months of frustration into measurable progress. And with this understanding, he felt a renewed sense of purpose as he planned the next days, knowing exactly which areas to concentrate on, which routines to refine, and which distractions to ignore, feeling for the first time that all the sweat, early mornings, and countless failures were not wasted, but had led him to a profound understanding that would finally allow his farm to thrive. And as night fell, and stars emerged over the wide fields, Jack Miller felt an unfamiliar yet welcome weightlessness, a quiet excitement that this simple insight was the key to unlocking the results he had been striving for, a moment of revelation that marked the turning point of his journey, promising that the work he would do next, guided by focus and intention, could finally yield the success he had been seeking. Jack Miller began the next morning with a renewed sense of determination, rising before the first light of dawn, boots on and gloves ready, the cool air of the early morning filling his lungs as he stepped into the fields that had challenged him for so long. And he approached the work not with frantic energy, but with focused intent, prioritizing the sections that he had identified as most critical to the farm's success, carefully tending to the crops that showed promise, adjusting irrigation precisely, and noting every change in soil and leaf with meticulous attention, each action deliberate and measured, a contrast to the scattered efforts of the past. And though progress was not instant, each small improvement fueled his confidence, a subtle shift in the way the plants responded, a slight increase in leaf vigor, a hint of green where before there had been yellow, and Jack found himself learning to trust the process, recognizing that results required patience, consistency, and the careful application of knowledge, not simply hours of work. And as the week progressed, he began to notice patterns emerging, understanding which crops thrived under certain sunlight angles, which sections required extra care, which planting sequences led to healthier growth, and he refined his methods day by day, always observing, always adjusting, and even when setbacks occurred, he approached them as lessons rather than failures, recording observations, thinking critically about the variables, and experimenting with small changes. The rhythm of the farm now guiding him rather than controlling him. And by the end of the month, Jack could see tangible signs of improvement, sections of the farm that had once struggled now showing strong, healthy growth, the satisfaction of seeing the plants flourish blending with a sense of accomplishment and pride. And though the journey was far from complete, he understood that this stage of the process, the careful, intentional application of his insight, was the foundation upon which future success would be built, a period of disciplined effort that required both patience and focus, teaching him that the combination of observation, learning, and strategic action could overcome the limitations of pure hard work. And as he stood at the edge of the field one evening, the sun casting long golden shadows over the rows, Jack Miller felt a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from seeing progress born from smart, consistent effort, a belief that if he continued on this path, the transformation of his farm and his life was not only possible, but inevitable. And this realization filled him with a sense of calm excitement, the anticipation of the growth to come mingling with the knowledge that he was finally aligned with the rhythm of the land and the principles that governed its success. One crisp morning, as Jack Miller walked through the rows of his crops, he noticed something he had not seen before, a subtle difference in the color and firmness of the stalks, a hint of vitality that suggested the land was beginning to respond to his careful, focused effort. And the realization hit him with quiet astonishment that his persistence and application of the single guiding principle were finally converging into visible results. The sun rising higher, casting warm light across the fields, making the green leaves shimmer and the soil glow. And for the first time in months, Jack felt the exhilaration of a breakthrough, a tangible sign that his farm was on the path to recovery. He moved through the sections he had prioritized, checking each plant, noting the improvements in growth and health, the subtle increase in yield, and even small successes in one corner of the field felt monumental after so many setbacks, filling him with cautious optimism. Yet he remained meticulous, knowing that consistency and observation were still required, that one lapse could undo the gains he had earned. And as he worked, neighbors passing by in their trucks noticed the change in his posture and the light in his eyes, a visible transformation from the hunched, burdened figure of the past to a man moving with purpose and quiet confidence. And Jack greeted them with a nod, sensing that the shift was not only in the land but in himself, a growing understanding of what truly mattered, and how each decision, each adjustment, could ripple through the farm, creating cumulative effects that would eventually redefine his success. He tested small innovations, adjusting spacing, trying minor variations in planting, timing irrigation with the sunrise, each experiment feeding back into his growing knowledge. And as days turned into weeks, the evidence became undeniable. More sections of the farm were thriving, the crops stronger, the soil richer, the farm humming with potential rather than despair. And Jack could feel the momentum building, the struggle that had once seemed endless now becoming the groundwork for lasting change. A testament to the power of focus and intelligence applied to work rather than labor alone. And standing at the edge of the field one evening, watching the golden sunset touch every row with warmth, Jack Miller felt a mixture of relief and excitement. The farm responding to his care, the lessons of hardship finally bearing fruit. And even though challenges remained, he understood that this was the turning point, the moment when persistent, thoughtful effort began to produce a transformation that had once seemed impossible, a moment that promised the future of the farm was finally in his hands, a twist in the story of toil and perseverance that signaled the beginning of genuine success. Months of focused effort had transformed Jack Miller and his farm into something almost unrecognizable from the struggling fields he had once walked, each row now vibrant and full, the crops standing tall and healthy, leaves glistening with morning dew, the rich smell of fertile soil filling the air. And as he moved between the rows, checking each section carefully, he felt a sense of calm confidence and accomplishment that had been absent for so long. The knowledge that his deliberate, thoughtful actions were producing measurable results settling into his mind and body like a reassuring rhythm. Neighbors passing by in trucks waved at him, commenting on the visible change in the land, the farm now radiating life and promise. and Jack returned their smiles with a warmth that reflected not only his pride, but also a deep understanding of the lessons he had learned. That perseverance combined with strategy and focus could overcome even the most stubborn challenges. And as he paused to admire the sunlight casting long golden shadows over the fields, he considered the journey that had brought him here, the months of trial and error, the countless early mornings and late nights, the moments of doubt and near surrender, all culminating in this steady, thriving transformation. And he realized that the farm was not just flourishing because of hard work, but because of the insight he had applied, the principle of concentrating on what truly mattered, letting go of distractions, and observing the land with patience and care, a practice that had reshaped his approach to every task, giving him clarity and control. Standing on the edge of the property, Jack felt a profound satisfaction, knowing that the land was now a reflection of his commitment, intelligence, and persistence, a tangible outcome of the lessons learned from failure and reflection. And as he watched the sun dip below the distant hills, painting the sky in warm hues of orange and pink, he felt the full measure of what it meant to transform struggle into mastery, understanding that the farm was no longer a source of anxiety, but a place of confidence and potential, a living testament to what could be achieved when focus, patience, and deliberate action replaced mere effort. And with a sense of quiet fulfillment, he continued through the fields, inspecting, adjusting, and appreciating every healthy stalk and fertile row, knowing that the change he had created was sustainable, that his hard-earned knowledge would continue to guide the farm into seasons of consistent growth, and that the journey of transformation had reshaped not only the land but himself, leaving him ready to face future challenges with the wisdom, skill, and confidence that had been forged through every past struggle. As Jack Miller walked slowly along the perimeter of his flourishing farm, the evening sky painted in deep hues of orange and purple, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the countless early mornings, long days, and moments of doubt that had once seemed insurmountable, now forming a tapestry of lessons that guided every decision he made. And he realized that the transformation of the farm was more than just the result of effort. It was a reflection of insight applied with intention, a practice of focusing on what truly mattered, observing the land carefully, adjusting strategies based on evidence, and learning from each small setback to build toward consistent success. He thought of the rows of corn, tall and resilient, the soil rich and evenly hydrated, and the vegetables in the garden growing in vibrant clusters, each element a testament to the principle he had embraced, the principle that had turned frustration into clarity and labor into tangible results. And as he walked, he felt a deep sense of connection to the land, understanding that his role was not only to work but to listen, to interpret the subtle signs of the farm, and to act thoughtfully. And in that quiet reflection, he recognized a profound truth that extended beyond agriculture, that success in any endeavor requires the combination of persistence, observation, and intelligent action. That repeated failure is not a signal to give up, but an opportunity to discover what works. And that mastery comes from refining techniques, concentrating on the essential tasks, and maintaining patience through the process. The wind rustling through the leaves carrying the scent of fertile soil and fresh growth. And Jack understood that this journey had reshaped him as much as it had reshaped the land, instilling a confidence tempered by humility, an awareness of his limits alongside the realization of his potential. And as he stood on the farmhouse porch, looking over the fields bathed in the last light of day, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that the farm was no longer a source of anxiety but a living testament to perseverance guided by wisdom, a reminder that transformation is possible when one applies focus and intention to effort, and that the principles he had discovered could guide him through future challenges, creating a sustainable path of growth and success, leaving Jack Miller not only as a skilled farmer, but as someone who had learned to convert struggle into understanding, effort into insight, and failure into the foundation of lasting achievement, a realization that would continue to shape his life and work for years to come. And as the stars began to emerge in the night sky, he felt a profound sense of hope and readiness, knowing that this story of change was just the beginning of what the future held.